Coming up on Theater Talk.
Audience can tell when they're in the presence of a truth that was discovered just for them, and they can tell when you've recycled something. They can smell it. They can feel it.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post. Now, Susan, there was a debate about a new Broadway musical called Shuffle Along, or the making of the musical sensation of 1921, and all that followed. And the debate was, for the Tony Awards, is Shuffle Along a revival of Shuffle Along from 1921, or is it a new musical that is taking a look at the importance of Shuffle Along? I think the debate is immaterial because what it is a great new American musical at the Music Box, directed by our good friend and created by our good friend George C. Wolfe.
Hello, hello.
Welcome back to Theater Talk.
Glad to be here.
Starring Tony-nominated, the beautiful Adrienne Warren as Gertrude Saunders and Florence Mills.
Yes, hello.
We all are going to wear your dress with us.
Okay, deal.
And also starring as Eubie Blake, one of the creators of Shuffle Along, our good friend Brandon Victor Dixon. Welcome back.
I put the dress on before we started.
I know, you look fabulous in it, I must say. Brandon Victor Dixon, welcome to Theater Talk. All right, George, what was it that got you thinking about doing a musical about something that many of us had forgotten about, an old 21 review? We love the songs, we love the music from it, but who gave Shuffle Along a thought in all these years?
Well, because we all had forgotten it, and that's where I wanted to. And the more I researched about it and the more I got to know inside of it, the more I found it really fascinating that something that was so monumentally significant in 1921, 63rd, it was at the 63rd Street Theater, that great theater, hello, and 63rd was a two-way street. They turned 63rd Street into a one-way street because traffic was so busy with people rushing to see Shuffle Along. It had 3 touring companies. It made $9 million. It ran for 504 performances. It integrated Broadway. It was the first time there was a jazz score. And it was the first time that a women's chorus on Broadway was like a hoofing dancing chorus as opposed to being decorative.
Right.
So it had all these innovations and both cultural and in terms of American musical theater and in terms of New York City. How could something that was so culturally significant end up a footnote that was a footnote to a footnote?
Right.
And so that became, and just that dichotomy became really, really fascinating to me. And then the more I read about it, the more I realized that it was embraced by uptown and downtown, by highbrow and lowbrow critics. George G. Nathan came to see it 5 times. Mm-hmm. Langston Hughes came to Columbia University because he wanted to go see Shuffle Along. So it had all these fans that were extraordinary. Paul Robeson was a replacement. Josephine Baker tried to join when she was 15. She couldn't get in, so she snuck into a road company. And all these stories just became more and more intriguing to me. And I went, this sings. Hello, hello. So, it's a musical. Hey, kids.
But why do you think it became a footnote? If it had that impact, why did it fall by the wayside? Because
history is written by those who survive, and a lot of people didn't. And also, I think that there was a revival in 1933 that was not so well received because talkies were taking over and the Depression was going on. And then was an ill-fated one that happened in 1952, and sort of its southernisms. And also I think they lost control of the show. Producers put in new songs throughout the book. And it wasn't viewed favorably by the Times.
Right.
Not the Times, but the Times,
right.
The days. So I think that didn't help. But also it's 1921 and it's an all-black show and it's about a southern town and it's hokey and foolish, but it's also a brilliant score. So I think Time was not kind because Time is frequently not kind to shows that are significant.
And
somebody's telling us.
And it gave us the standard I'm Just Wild About Harry.
Exactly.
Now, Adrienne and Brandon, you guys are probably musical theater kids, right? You know,
Yes.
grow up
We'll see. We'll see where you're going with this.
I'm not calling you a show queen. Relax.
No. You just admitted you tried on Adrienne's dress.
It's not about that.
It's too late now. Okay. Yes, okay, go ahead.
Did you have any idea what Shuffle Along was when you were a kid growing up, learning about musicals and wanting to be?
No idea. I didn't know anything about the show until I started talking to George about it. And then I felt horrible that I didn't know this history, because it's my history. It's all of our history.
Yeah, I didn't know either. And I mean, one of the reasons that it was a joke, but I mean, as much as I've done music theater and I've grown up with certain chunks of it, there are significant gaps in my knowledge of musical theater and the history of musical theater and certain shows. I mean, he's nodding his head because he scoffs at me when he makes certain references that I do. But
Sweeney Todd.
come on, I got that one covered.
West Side Story.
Anyway, but no, I didn't know about Shuffle Along at all either, and so the more that I learned about it once I started doing the show, and then in these conversations with George, and as we shared research materials amongst each other, everything he said is correct. It's like everybody needs to know.
Yeah.
We knew about it because of Josephine Baker, because
Exactly.
Jean-Claude Baker would talk to us about.
I met Bricktop.
Really?
Well,
Wow.
Bricktop, who was in Shuffle Along, she's
Bricktop?
mentioned. She was a performer. She's mentioned in the
Ricky
show.
Bricktop.
And I haven't thought about it, but I knew Jean-Claude Baker, who had the restaurant Chez
Yes.
Josephine, shrine to his mother, Josephine Baker. I've known him since 1989, and Bricktop was still alive in the early 90s, and she would come down and he would introduce, you remember how flamboyant he was?
Yeah.
He would introduce my beloved Bricktop, and she'd come in and people were like, nobody knew.
Yes, nobody knew.
Nobody knew.
No, and that's what happens. I found a journal entry from a woman writer whose name I've forgotten, who wrote about Lottie G, who Audra plays, and it was during the 1920s. We arrived in Paris at 4 o'clock, found ourselves at Bricktops. Lottie G, too much champagne and not in good voice, but sang her hit song from Shuffle Along, and we all cheered like mad. And it's just this wonderful slice of life, and it's just so thrilling to know that once upon a time there was this extraordinary world where uptown and downtown, where Broadway artists, there was a midnight show that was added to Shuffle Along. My favorite thing, it said, midnight show starts at 11:30. That was added because Fanny Brice campaigned Florinell Miller and said, we want to come see the show, but we're on the same schedule.
Oh.
So a midnight show was added, and it was packed every single Wednesday night with all these celebrities. Al Jolson, each Wednesday night would buy 200 tickets and just get people to be. So there was just this incredibly wonderful time where Broadway was exploding with all these possibilities and energies and rhythms and music. And so we wanted to celebrate that, and that's what Shuffle Along is.
So then I wondered what happened.
If one looks at it almost anthropologically,
Yes,
or
yes.
that what I think what ended up happening, Shuffle Along, the score is much more sophisticated than the book. But then that's the case of
But
a
that
lot
was
of
all the
things.
shows.
Right.
All the
That was
20
all the
years
shows,
ago.
yeah.
But I think what ended up happening, a lot of the influences, a lot of the influence that Shuffle Along had got absorbed by other shows. Florence Ziegfeld hired the chorus girls from Shuffle Along to teach his chorus girls how to dance. Will Voldere, who did the vocal arrangements, was also hired by Flo Ziegfeld to do orchestrations for the Ziegfeld Follies for the ensuing years, and also was brought in to do Showboat. Right. So what ended up happening, there's a line in the show, the best of Shuffle Along got eaten alive by more famous shows.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think that's fundamentally what happens. And musicals were searching for an identity. They
Or
were
a
a little
form,
bit
really.
a real form. And there was melodrama, and then there'd be operetta, and then there'd be a little bit of vaudeville, then there'd be a little bit of tent shows and minstrel shows, and then was it 4 years later you have Showboat, which figured out a significantly more significant, sophisticated form.
Right.
And then by that time everything else became a dinosaur, and they either survived generally because of the quality of the score, but not because of the quality of the show.
I want to delve into the characters because they're fascinating. You play two, Adrienne.
Yes.
And the one I'm most curious about, though, because there's tragedy there, is Florence Mills,
Yes.
who becomes a star because of Shuffle Along. And I believe the history of it, she's a nobody when she shows up for the audition, right?
She's been performing for a while, but she's basically a no one by the time she auditions for Shuffle Along, and she knows this is her one opportunity to get to the next level. And when she auditions, no one's ever heard a voice like hers. She's a very bird-like voice, very soft and demure personality. And when she actually performs, I think the entire cast initially thought, how would she ever replace Gertrude Saunders, who I play in Act One,
Right.
which is very
Who's loud
brassy.
and brassy.
Who's brassy and a real
brassy.
showbiz dame.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And this tiny 100-pound girl comes on stage and has standing ovation after standing ovation every time she sings, and goes on from Shuffle Along, becomes huge internationally, and she really becomes the first Black, I want to say, superstar.
She appeared on Broadway, then she appeared in London, and there were all these people writing reviews, we don't want her, all these racist statements that were made, and she walks on stage, sings one song, and the entire audience leaps to their feet cheering. So she becomes a huge star there. Then she goes to Paris, she becomes a huge star there. I think she was Piaf meets Billie Holiday meets Judy Garland,
Yeah.
but with this incredibly fragile voice, and then died very, very, very young.
Very young.
Extraordinarily very young. And there's not one recording.
I was going to ask
Of
you,
her.
I was going to say, is there a recording of her? Any YouTube
No.
clip of her?
No.
We don't know what she
No,
really sounded like.
which is, and Adrienne found this fact,
Yeah.
which is the one time one of the times they really tried to record her voice was on the stage of the Music Box.
Oh, really? Now, Brandon, you're UB Blake, and he was actually the one person from Shuffle Along who became famous again, but later in life, because I remember UB. Remember that?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And also
And
because
people-
of the
there was
Sting and all
Right,
that other
that's
stuff.
right.
There was a resurgence of like acknowledgement of ragtime music and,
Right.
and jazz music, and so it kind of came up. UB really lived this somewhat, semi-charmed kind of life. UB's talent was, and the music was always his focus, his love and his heart. And with that, he managed to negotiate his way through some very difficult times, and even through the fallow periods of his career. He wasn't out beating down doors. People came to him. People came to UB and were immediately charmed by the love and the joy and the spirit of UB. I mean, I've been meeting people outside after the show who said they met him when they were doing UB.
He lived to be like 93,
Yeah.
94, something like that.
It's up for debate.
Some say 100.
Yeah.
It was actually, I read that he added 4 years, so he actually died when he was 96. But 100 is a much better slogan. He lived to be 100, yes.
So anyway, so you've run into people who
And
knew UB.
they talk about seeing UB or waiting after the show and meeting UB, and just the wave of warmth and love that would flow from this man and his desire to be a part of it and to be present. A lot of times people would think that UB's age was a real restriction on him, but it wasn't at all. And he went to Philadelphia to do this large concert, and there was no piano on the stage. It was in the orchestra pit, which I guess was open at the time. And it was his first performance, like public performance, in many, many years. And he sat down, and then he got up and he turned around and he said, I've been playing, I've been playing the piano for 75 years, and everybody thought he was gonna, make some sort of explanation about why his fingering might not be together. And he said, "This is the first time I've ever performed with my back to an audience." And they turned around and they just gave him a rousing cheer. And then he gave the most astounding performance that any of them had seen come from anybody. Just his fingers were always together. He was really just truly a special man.
A team that completely was lost that you brought back with Shuffle Along are Miller and Lyles,
Yes.
who were playwrights.
Yes, yes.
So tell us a little bit about them and how they fit into this.
Well, Flournoy Miller and Aubrey Lyles met at Fisk University, and Aubrey Lyles was studying medicine. And Flournoy's father was the editor of a newspaper somewhere, and they were both from Tennessee. And they started putting on little school skits and performances, and they fit together perfectly as a team. And then after school, they went to Chicago and did and worked for a black theater there. And then they were discovered, and then they were touring around on the Keith Albee circuit and became very successful. They became very successful as blackface performers, and so they were this huge top draw, and very smart, very well educated. And then they met Cecil and Blake at a benefit, and that said, people tell us our material's great, but we need songs if we want to make it to Broadway. And they said, well, we've got great songs and we've been looking for material. And they formed this partnership, and that's how it happened. And they're really fascinating guys, because Flournoy lived at least into the 70s, and Aubrey died just before the revival of 33.
Yes,
died
he
a very
died
young
young.
man. Yes, he died very, very young. And he was a very flamboyant, very outspoken, very funny, but very aggressive personality, and was incredibly very short. And they had, at one point in Shuffle Along, they would stop the show literally, and they would put on a 25 to 30 minute boxing skit that people would come back to see over and over and over and over. Needless to say, we explored it.
We explored it.
We explored it out of the room. Yeah.
Which is a nice segue into my question for the actors. So, we have with us one of the great American directors, one of the great theater directors, George C. Wolfe. So give us a sense. Pretend he's not here, Adrienne.
Oh, okay.
Give us a sense of what it's like. He's not here. What it's like to go to work for George C. Wolfe.
I would go to work with George C. Wolfe any day of my career, if I'm blessed to keep having a career after the show. Because the rehearsal room from the beginning is made to be such a safe space. And he wants us all to play constantly, and he wants you to fail, and because he wants to see what brilliance comes out of that failure, and he inspires you as an artist to delve deep into yourself to find whatever you can find, as well as working with him to find something special and brilliant and different. And I am so grateful.
Now, when you do, though, fail, how does George C. Wolfe convey to you that this bit is perhaps not working?
He will say,
coming your way, Brad.
he will say, well, let's try something else. In that way.
And
he'll make you laugh about it as well. And you can, he's a very, very special man.
And when you fail, Brandon, how does that?
George. When I fail, it's hard to answer that question, Michael.
Oh, geez.
I will say, I'll say this about George, and I tell people this often. When you enter a room for the first time, you really try to figure out what your place is in this mechanism and how best to uplift the piece and what you have to give, what you have to hold back, etc. And with George, he's one of the few people who rather immediately just how special he is. And I recognized immediately I'm here to listen and give. Give all I can and absorb all that I can. And okay. Now, not just George isn't here, you aren't here. Listen and give. Part of the way I listen is by asking questions and challenging things. So, but you listen and you give, and he challenges you, and he invites the challenge himself. And one of the best things that George can say for me is when you discuss, as you dissect a piece or dissect the piece, you ask him a question, and sometimes he's like, I don't know, let's figure it out. And he has the confidence to know that we have the tools in the room to figure it out. Right. We'll get there.
Right.
Maybe we need to learn part A before we learn part B, or maybe we learn part D before we learn part B, but we'll get there. Let's trust it. Let's explore. Let's live. I think George has a real recognition of how he has become or fought to become his greatest self and become the great artist that he is. And so he really seeks to empower us and provide us with the environment and the tools to become our greatest selves, to protect us and to lift us up so that his work and Savion's work falls away, so that we can live and exist.
But George, you also wrote this show too. So do you come to the rehearsal when you've cast everybody, your book is set in stone, or are you willing to
Nothing steady.
Throw the book.
Nothing.
I mean, are your lines so precious that, like Edward Albee, when Edward comes in with a play, you do the play the way Edward Albee wrote it.
No, one of the things which I say all the time, an audience can tell when they're in the presence of a truth that was discovered just for them, and they can tell when you've recycled something. They can smell it. They can feel it. And so I've done a lot of shows and a lot of different kinds of shows, so I have a lot of weapons. But I like to let go of those weapons so that therefore I can be virginal to the material, for lack of better words. And if I'm writing something and if I've written something, I just have this feeling that something is either growing or it's dying. Nothing is stasis. Nothing is as is. So as you're working on material, you're investing it with growth, and sometimes that growth comes from an actor. Sometimes that growth comes from, this line needs to not be this, or this line needs to be that. So you just have to be available to the process, because if you create a smart room, and by smart room I mean that you invite as smart, gifted people in the room who have varying types of articulation, then all the answers are there. And so you just have to discover and play. I think very early on, I was doing a show in college, and it was something I'd written, and I was directing. And I was working with a composer who wasn't very good. And the cast was over in the corner, and they were making all this noise, and they were driving me insane because I was trying to solve a problem. Just at the point where I was getting really annoyed, they were over in the corner solving the problem. And so that's how theater works. That's how theater works. I like a sense of anarchy, and you know, which at any given moment, you know, I can roar and go, no, we're not doing that. But I like that sense of anarchy because then everybody else is discovering what they don't know.
Right.
Everybody else is dangling somewhere out there in this weird state of what's going to happen next.
Right.
And then the work feels fresh, and then the work feels new, and then everybody is up on stage shining with a kind of energy saying, look what I've discovered for you.
Right.
As opposed to, yeah, you've seen me do this again.
Right.
You know?
Yep.
And then there's this thing that happens, which is theater.
But this is very much, though, what Shuffle Along is about.
Yeah.
Because they don't really know what they have when
Right.
they're out of town, and they're discovering and creating as they're going along, solving very technical problems, and in some cases financial problems, like we don't have any money to get on the train to go to Philadelphia.
Right.
Every case.
Right.
And we don't have enough money for scenery, and so somebody sends them a trunk of
costumes.
smelly costumes, and then they got to turn a number into them. And that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to live in this show, because you live inside of the energy of the show. Because you know, you come to New York, and then you have hits, and you go, oh, they love me. And then you have failure, you go, oh, they hate me. And then you go, oh, they love me. All this sort of crap, and you cultivate all this armor, and then that which is kind of essential and stupid. And so I wanted to live inside of that energy that I had when I first came to New York.
Right.
Of G kids, let's put on a show. Mm-hmm. You know, I wanted to go back to that. You know, there was some article that Frank Rich summarizing the season that 9 happened, and he was talking about the seasons unfold as it is, and there was the final line was, and who knows, at this time on the Upper West Side in a small apartment, there's some young mind who has a vision for the American theater, and it is no pipe dream. And I went, he knows about me. He doesn't know.
That ego was always
exactly. You know, and it's just that sense of that stupid, blind belief and faith that you have to have at the beginning of your career. And I wanted to create a show that celebrated that stupid, blind faith that you have to have. And everybody who made this show had this same kind of stupid, blind faith. Who comes into New York $18,000 in debt, which is the equivalent of $250,000, and ends up a hit?
Yeah.
Doesn't happen. So, but they did it because failure was not an option.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a big option, but for them, they just plowed forward. So that's the energy that I wanted to. I wanted to live there again, and I wanted to be in a room with people who were living there as well.
I've got to wrap it up in 1 minute, but let's just go back to, we know little George up there in his apartment reading Frank Rich, he knows about me. Can you give us a sense, Adrienne, when it all began for you? I mean, the first time you fell in love with the theater, something you were in or something you saw, you thought, I have to work in this world somehow.
Well, the first time I'd ever seen a show, I remember it was Once Upon a Mattress, and I was sitting on my mother's lap, and I looked at her, and I was maybe 6 years old at the time, and I said, Mom, I'm going to do that. She had no idea what I meant at the time and what that would all entail. But I knew from very early on, I was also an athlete, so I knew I wanted to do that, but I stopped growing, so that dream came to a quick halt. And I had to get serious about my theater training because I knew that's where my passion, my heart lived there. And now I'm here and I'm grateful for it.
Yes.
Yeah. And not that you were into musicals when you were growing up, Brandon, but
I absolutely was. I absolutely
Really?
was. I had a wonderful, wonderful school growing up. We had a music class every day. We did 3 musicals a year. The junior high, they did a Shakespeare play every year.
Where was that?
This is Rockville, Maryland, Christ Episcopal School. Burt Worth ran the program, and she really, both my brother and I, because my brother is 6 years older than I is, but he started all the musicals, and so then I just did the same thing as I grew up, and But so I've always had a love, and I've known from a very early age that this is exactly what I was going to do. It's one of the reasons I came to New York to go to Columbia so that I could audition while I was in school.
So he could be in Shuffle Along, just like
Exactly. But my first Broadway show was Ragtime in high school, sitting in the very last row with those little binoculars, watching Stokes and Audra. And I mean, I've idolized them, particularly Stokes, because he's a leading man. But I idolized him since that day, and so to be in this production
Must be a thrill for you.
Yeah, not only with George and Savion, but with people like Stokes and Audra and Billy. It's an absolute dream. This is it's very special. We're really excited to be here.
Well, the show is Shuffle Along, or the Making of the Musical Sensation of 1921. And all that followed, created by George C. Wolfe, with, we must say, superb choreography by Savion Glover.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've been watching Savion since he was
Yep.
right. But I mean, he's really emerged into a major force as a choreographer.
Brilliant choreographer.
Is he?
Brilliant performer, too.
Absolutely. And he's come, and by the way, we should say he's going to come into the show.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
Specialty, are you going to bring back the boxing segment for him?
Exactly. With himself.
Imagine.
Exactly.
With the feet.
Exactly.
All right, George C. Wolfe, creator of Shuffle Along, thank you for being our guest.
Thank you very
on
much.
Broadway. The lovely Adrienne Warren, Tony-nominated for her performance in Shuffle Along.
Thank you.
And our good friend Brandon Victor Dixon, who plays UB Blake.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for being our guest tonight on Theater Talk.
Thank you,
Thanks for
guys.
having us.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the CORY and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you